everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
And it's Jackie.
Oh boy, you guys, I'm excited because we are recording this episode in a brand new location. We're in our brand new room. It's we're going to call it the studio, though it is just...
call it the game room.
The game room.
It's a serious room, man.
It's serious.
Yeah.
I'm real jealous. I want everyone to know out in podcast land that when Rob took a picture of this room and sent it to my husband because they're friends, Rob's not just friends with me. And he sent a picture to my husband. He's like, look at this room. And I was like, why don't we do anything to our house? Why don't we have nice things? That's what I said.
Right. This room used to be a storage room, but we fixed it up. We painted it up. We took out all the extra stuff. We made a whole wall of bookshelves that have all of our games on it because we're also big board game nerds.
Seriously, a lot of board games.
All of our podcast equipment is in here now, too.
Yes.
The only thing that you've forgotten to do is to bolt this sucker to the wall.
Oh, no, it's bolted.
It's bolted to the wall.
You guys
Were you
are
gonna
the
climb
best
on it?
parents
Yeah.
ever. Yes. You never know. You have crazy children.
That's true.
No,
we do.
they wouldn't, but it is bolted.
Yes. Good for you.
The little one wouldn't even come in this room when we told him it wasn't yet bolted. He wouldn't even come through the door.
Oh, nice. Mine would be like, I'm going to climb
Yeah.
it. So you're just protecting my family, basically.
Yes, when they come visit. But this isn't a podcast about home decor.
Oh,
it's a
is it?
podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, wherever we discuss a topic related to the field and have some juicy articles to chew on. Num, 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 num. And so this week, we're going to be talking all about token economies, which I couldn't really seg into our previous discussion of the new studio/game room space. But oh well. It's like a token economy of space.
No, it's
Nope,
not necessary.
Didn't work. All right. But anyway, we're talking about token economies this week, which, again, is sort of I think a basic applied behavior analytic technology that we have really never talked directly about all the way up to the high 100 episode count. So I'm glad we're finally doing
who
it.
even knows what number episode this is.
It's getting up there. So token economy is, again, one of the earliest, I think, kind of uses of applied behavior analysis in terms of historical.
Yeah.
But why don't we go around and sort of share what we know of the history of the token economy? Just briefly, though, and then we'll get into its application in our articles.
Sure. Well, the history goes way back, right? Because the idea of a token economy is one that we talk about when we first introduce the concept of reinforcement, because we talk about that there are primary reinforcers, which are reinforcers that are innately reinforcing due to our evolutionary history. And then there are things called conditioned reinforcers, which are things that come to function as reinforcers through pairing with primary reinforcers. And then there are things that work like conditioned reinforcers sometimes under some contexts, but there's also this idea of a generalized conditioned reinforcer, which is something that basically like stands for a reinforcer, right? So in and of itself, it's not necessarily reinforcing, but it comes to function as a reinforcer because you can utilize it in many different ways and exchange it for other conditioned or primary reinforcers. So those types of generalized conditioned reinforcers could be very general, like points or tokens. They could be a little bit more abstract, as so something like social praise might function as a generalized conditioned reinforcer. And when you have a system such as this, you can create basically like a closed system, right? Where, I'm going to give you these points, and you can trade in the points for something else later on, which makes the points then have value. Oh, money. Money's another good example.
Yeah, money.
I kind of forgot like the basic one.
I love money.
That's what I want. Right. So we're introduced to the idea of generalized conditioned reinforcers and therefore tokens, usually pretty early on in our learning about behavior analysis, right? And the research on utilizing token economies goes way back. And we're going to review some of those early articles today as part of this conversation. And I do want to preface that what we're going to talk about today is like the basic idea of token economies, right? We're anticipating having an episode sooner rather than later that gets into more recent research and much more nuanced and complex ways to think about generalized conditioned reinforcement, how to determine when it actually functions as a reinforcer and when it no longer functions as a reinforcer. But we're not going to get into all of that today. We're just going to talk about some early research related to token economies.
And not even the earliest research on token economies.
And varied research on token economies.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another thing that I love. It's not just token economies are not just used for autistic individuals or persons with developmental disabilities.
Yes, we're going to be talking solely about the use of token economies in applied settings today, as well as looking at slightly, I know what you mean, Diana. Most of these articles, we'll share the articles are a bit old, a bit long in the tooth, but I mean, there's certainly been research even before, I think, that the 70s and 80s on token economies. It's kind of an oldie, but is it a goodie, I guess is the question.
Right.
And that would be the next thing, because I know when we started talking about doing token economies, I know I'm pretty pro token economy in terms of usage. However, I do find that it mostly has been misused, or it's only partially used in a lot of situations, or there's sort of a misconception that like it's too hard to do, or requires like having an economist on staff to run them, so they're not applicable for anything other than, maybe like a really severe institution with lots of staff and, specialized trainers. So I don't see them used as often as even I did, when I started teaching back, 10 plus years ago. But what are your thoughts on token economies in general, or your concerns, your pros, your cons about them?
Well, I can say that I don't love them. They're not my favorite for a variety of reasons. But I think my biggest concerns with token economies is that they're frequently thrown in without measuring whether the tokens actually serve as reinforcers, and they're not tested periodically throughout using a token economy on whether they still function as reinforcers as if they originally did, right? Mm-hmm. Another thing I don't love about them is that people will frequently use token economies both in a reinforcing sense and in a punishing sense, right? So they'll provide a token for appropriate behavior they're looking, and then take away tokens for whatever they don't want to see. That gets confusing, I think, right? Mm-hmm. And what I've read in the literature about that, and what I've experienced personally, is that when you take tokens away, kids could give an F, right? Like you're going to see emotional responding. Kids are going to be like, I am out. I've lost everything. If you lose all the tokens, they're like, see ya. You got nothing left.
Yep.
I'm out of the game.
So sort of like some of the exclusionary timeout, or the timeout ribbon article. I remember that one being one of my favorites in terms of describing, favorites, quote unquote, in terms of describing just that emotional reactivity of like, timeout, I'll show you timeout,
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't love that. I think they are overused in ways that are not appropriate, right? And I've also frequently seen them, they're like, oh, you have a favorite character? We'll slap that on like a little circle thing. What are those called?
A token?
Poker chips.
Oh yeah.
We'll slap that. It's been too long. We'll slap that on a poker chip, and we're doing it. Like
that's the economy.
That's
but
the economy.
Checking to see if that's really going to function as
no
a
backup, and no backup reinforcers for the token.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. No backup reinforcers.
Right. And then two more things that I get concerned about with token economies. They frequently don't have like a variety of reinforcers available, right? So it's like, oh, you get through 10. Here's a small edible. Like, F that too, right? Like, nobody wants a small edible after doing a ton of work.
Well, I guess it depends on how the economy is weighed.
Sure, but people don't even think about that, right?
Yeah,
so that's what you say, right? But people...
I agonize over my economies when I do like point systems or token systems. I spend so much time trying to set it up so that it's doable within a certain amount of time, which tasks are going to be weighed heavier versus
so you do that.
Lighter. I spend a lot of time on them.
I have not seen that in clinical practice.
In me? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I've not seen that function in clinical practice that way, right? As a consultant and wherever I've been. And I wonder about the validity of token economies, right? So many autistic individuals that can talk about token economies have expressed their displeasure on them because they're not meant for them, right? They haven't thought about their preferences or whether that is how life actually works in the real world. And so whenever I hear that, I stop and think to myself, do I really want to be doing this? Right? So if there's social validity involved, like spoiler alert, in mine, there was casual social validity, and we'll talk about how that was measured. So I worry about that. But one thing I can say that I like about token economies is that they signify a beginning and an end of a session, right? If you get something right, you get a token, and then you can look and see when the session's going to end. So I like that.
Yeah.
For the minimal.
But I see. I'd put that as the con. But Diana, you wanted to. Sorry, you had something you wanted to say about that.
Well, I was gonna add that I think sometimes token economies are used in the way that you're describing, Jackie, which is you're sitting at the desk, you earn 10 tokens, which, just as a quick aside, I loved making those little token boards. And like, we would pick out the stickers that our students really liked, and we would laminate them, and I cut out like each little one out of the laminate and then put the Velcro on the back, and then like the token board would have a scene on it, and you could put the tokens wherever you want, which my students did seem to like. But aside from that, you're sitting at the table, you get the 10 tokens, right? And then you like trade in for the thing that you're contracted for. And that's a much different type of system, I think, than when you earn points, let's say, and then you have a whole menu of backup reinforcers that you can trade in for. And we call them the same thing. But it seems to me that it's likely that system, where it's like an FR10, and then the better thing is really functioning more like a compound schedule.
Yeah. Oh, way to bring in the compound schedule.
Yeah, that's a great point, Diana.
And because it's a signaled schedule, it actually may, in fact, slow responding.
Oh, sure. Right in the beginning, right?
Over time, rather than produce an increase in responding, which is what you're really looking for. So utilizing them in that way may have counterintuitive effects, in addition to the additional problematic reasons that you brought up.
Well, I do like that all the articles we'll be discussing really are looking at token economies as, I think, some of the earliest kind of renditions of what a token economy could be are, in terms of its sort of widespread, large population is taking part in the token economy. It's looking at, multiple behaviors or multiple responses that can earn tokens, and then they're traded in at sort of, the school store or the mine store or whatever store it happens to be, the prison store.
Yeah.
Rather than, like you said, Diana, that basic compound schedule. We're going to earn 10 tokens, and then you trade in for a thing, then you'll earn another 10, and then you trade in for another thing, which, that really, I think that misses many of the, I think, positives of using a token economy. Yeah,
but I will say, to get my piece in here about my overall view of token economies, is even when you're looking at that larger, like, let's earn as many as you can, and then we'll pick from a menu, there's still a lot of power differential inherent in that type of system, because it's only going to work as a reinforcement system if it's a closed economy, right? So you can only get access to those things by buying them with the points or the tokens or whatever you have, right? So there's, through the nature of that, restrictions on what people can sort of naturally access, and that there are places where there are closed economies, right? So like my 4th grade class teacher, Mrs. Davis, she made us a school store.
I love her.
In the class, we could earn points. I don't remember how. I loved it so much that I'm still talking about it today. I almost feel like she may have brought in a display case. I think that was in the corner of the room.
Whoa.
Like you see it, like the skee ball places, right? And like there was like erasers and pencils and who knows, like just, silly little junk. But I loved it so much, right? But like within her classroom, it was a closed economy. And that didn't feel coercive to me in any way, right? But the problem there is that there's always the potential for abuse and coercion within those systems when one person holds all the cards.
That's true, but to some extent, most of the locations in which one is going to use the token economy, you already have someone in charge who holds all the cards and could be coercive anyway.
Yes.
So I guess the question then becomes,
change that.
Is it more... you certainly should not have someone who is in charge who's completely coercive. But I guess if you were going to do some sort of a more systematic assessment, is it worse? Maybe there's a philosophical question. Is it worse to have a coercive token economy or a coercive work environment with no token economy? At least one, there's the sense that maybe you'll get something nice at the end of it all.
There's opportunity for reinforcement.
There's an opportunity for... Whereas the other one, it's like, this is just bad all the time. I get nothing but punished.
And then the other piece I guess I'd add to this is if you may be able to establish the responding that you're looking for in this type of closed economy system, but you should not expect that responding to maintain outside of that
Smart.
closed system.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll shut up now.
No, I want you to know, as an aside, we also had that type of store, but
You did?
it was school wide.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was right outside the cafeteria, and you earned tickets for completing your
Yes.
homework on time and for helping the teacher. And one time I saved enough tickets to get a hold the phone Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper.
What?
Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been so many tickets.
All year. It had
Wow.
a beautiful
Did it have a
unicorn.
rainbow leopard on it?
Yeah, and a unicorn on one
Yes.
side. It was,
My Trapper Keeper was just
Amazing.
blue and red.
yeah, because you didn't save all year. You weren't
Classic.
sucking up to the teacher
No, I
and
did.
the librarian. By the way,
My mom had to cash in her Trapper Keeper stamps. That's all I could get.
my librarian was old when I was in second grade, and she's still alive. So she's
Oh my
like
goodness.
so old.
Was she really old, or she was old? She was like
She was probably
32,
45.
and you were like,
Yeah.
"Wow, what an old person!"
She's like 97 right
Oh,
now,
okay,
and still
okay.
like
Woo.
walking around recommending books.
Good
She doesn't
for
work there
her.
anymore. She just wanders around
Well,
recommending
my
books.
school
You
got
gotta-
dissolved.
You got to keep active.
Yeah, but it's amazing.
That's great.
Wow. Nice.
Well,
Thank you for
anyway,
sharing.
this is
Anyway.
the longest we've ever gone without actually introducing what articles we'll be discussing. Congratulations, everybody. We did it. So, what are we going to talk about now that we've talked generally
said
about
everything I'm
token
gonna say.
economies? That's it? You got no more? We are discussing 4 articles. 2 that are going to sound pretty, typical, I think, for many of you who work in school settings, and 2 that are going to be a little outside the box, a little wacky, if you say.
Open.
Open.
Get it?
I get it. And the listeners have no idea, though. We haven't
They will, and then
because we
they'll
haven't
laugh.
said what we're talking about. Here we go. So, our 2 classroom articles. Intrinsic Reinforcers in a Classroom Token Economy by McLaughlin and Malaby from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, 1972.
I'm just gonna say that I think being in this new studio has invigorated us.
Has
I know,
it?
we're so excited.
I know. We're so excited.
We're always excited,
So
you guys.
quiet in
Always
here.
excited. All right, the next one. The effect of the absence of close supervision on the use of response cost in a prison token economy by Bassett and Blanchard from Java 1977.
Blanchard. Just like Golden Girls.
Oh, yes. Token economy plus self-monitoring to reduce disruptive classroom behaviors by Zlomke and Zlomke from the Behavior Analyst today. But not from today. It was actually from 2003,
From the yesteryear.
the yesteryears. And the long-term effects of a token economy on safety performance in open pit mining by Fox, Hopkins, and Anger from Java 1987. So our first article on behavior analysis in the mines.
And spoiler
In the
alert.
mines.
Spoiler alert, everyone. I looked up open pit mining, learned about it, and learned about where you can find the fatalities fatality statistics.
Oh, wow.
For the year 2021.
Wow.
Are you going to tell us?
Yeah. Also, spoiler alert, they show you a picture where the accident happened.
Oh.
Creepy, right?
Oh, my.
Yikes.
Yeah. Okay. Now you'll tune in. I'm last.
All right. Well, why don't we start with kind of our more traditional token economy system? So it's classroom, and usually if we're talking about classrooms, I'm the one who's doing most of the talking, because that's usually my bread and butter. So we're going to start by looking at the McLaughlin and Malaby 1972 article. And, let's be honest, this is pretty much a straightforward look, everybody, a token economy in a classroom kind of study. It's an older article. It's sort of a post-good behavior game article in which, there was a renewed interest, I think, in how can we use this science of behavior to improve classroom performance. And really the positive of this article is the idea that it is looking at how can we use a token economy without elaborate, tangible backup reinforcers, and how can we do it in a real classroom with real students for a long time with a real teacher running the whole shebang. This isn't a bunch of researchers coming in and doing a 3-month study where they're like, oh, my intern's doing all the data numbers, and you got someone backing you up, and you really just teach the class. Don't worry about the token economy. The teacher is the researcher and is doing every little bit of the economy. So that's really the strength of this article, in that a token economy can be used by one person without some sort of elaborate, expensive backup reinforcer. So
Maybe Mrs. Davis, my 4th grade teacher, was the participant in the study.
she might have been, or she read it herself and was like, you know what, if this McLaughlin and Malaby can do it, and I can too. So, when we talked about token economies, like Diana mentioned, we're usually talking about something where there's, points. You earn points for engaging in some sort of, some sort of response. You have some sort of a tangible that serves as the backup reinforcer for those points. But really what this study wanted to know is, do we really need to have fancy items, or can it be more free or cheap things? And how many people need to be involved to run this study in a real classroom? So this is a 5th and 6th grade combination classroom, which it's not Little House on the Prairie time. It's 1972, but apparently these were still classrooms at the time in a low socioeconomic area of Spokane, Washington. So it was either 25 to 29 students given, absences from the day, with one teacher. Again, not one teacher and a bunch of researchers, one teacher and assistant teacher, one teacher and one teacher only.
Very, very specific.
Very specific. Now, the assignments that are going to be looked at here are probably going to feel, for some of you, if you're a bit of an older listener, you're going to say, yeah, we had a lot of these assignments. We had our spelling assignment and our language arts assignment and our handwriting assignment and our math assignment, and we'd sit and we'd do that work, and then we'd check over the work, and that would be the work for the day. Whereas younger folks who are used to being in school where everything's a project and you're working in centers and you're moving around things, these are going to sound like the most boring activities ever. And perhaps they are.
School's boring.
So who can say? And that's going to be
kidding.
kind of a limitation in that, is there generality to the present day with this study? But in any case, you've got a number of students who need to complete tasks in these 4 assignments. And the issue is the students weren't handing in their work, or they wouldn't finish all of their work. So could a token economy increase how much work was completed in a day? So the primary teacher started by explaining how the economy worked to the class, that they could earn points for all sorts of desirable behaviors, though the main behavior of interest was the completion of tasks. But you could earn points for getting items correct, for feeding the classroom animals, for listening, for neatness. Remember when neatness was a thing? When you could take notes, if you were quiet at lunchtime, you could earn bonuses for engaging in sort of, other, positive behaviors in the classroom. So there were a lot of behaviors in the economy, but getting work done was really the primary variable.
When I was in grade school, I used to get Lunchables for lunch, and I would throw the pieces of meat up at the ceiling.
Oh, Jackie.
And they would stick.
So, Jackie, you would be losing points.
See, I don't like it when you lose points.
Well, in this system, this was sort of a follow-up to another study that this pair had done, in which they really wanted to make sure that if they were going to do losing points, it was a big deal. Because if they were going to use punishment, again, if you're going to use punishment, you better use punishment. Don't do it half measures if you need to use it at all.
Do you really, though?
They had decided from their previous study that it would be helpful to put in place that if you didn't finish your assignments, if you ate gum or candy, that was a big no-no. I put a little exclamation point in my notes here. Or if you had inappropriate behavior or you were fighting, you could lose 100 points.
You can't have gum at school.
Yeah, I would lose all the points because I'm a candy girl. I'm a gum girl. I fight. And I talk loud and out of turn. So
I never do any of those
You
things.
don't.
So you might lose your points. And again, this was based on they'd done a previous study, and this had sort of been the level of response cost they'd used to sort of suppress some of that quote unquote bad behavior. So that's why they were adding it in here. Do they really need it? Again, that's a question for another time. Every week, the students would exchange their points for special privileges. And these are privileges that the students got to choose. The teacher asked the students, what would you think is a privilege? And then rank them in terms of how desirable the kids said they were. And then, depending on the grade level, because it was a 2-grade level class, they made these elaborate systems. So sports was the highest, playing sports, which makes sense. Because everyone loves to play, big games with the class. Medium were things like seeing the classroom animals or being on a committee. Public service students, I guess.
They haven't been in academia for long enough.
Guess not. Jeez. Special jobs, special projects. And then the lowest points were things like taking out the balls, listening to records, which, that would be...
Taking out the balls.
I guess at recess, it'd be like your job. You go take the balls out. Playing games. I'm wondering what games they're playing, because games are awesome. Like Diana said, we have a bunch of games around us right now, and they're great. But, it's 1972, so all you could play is Chutes and Ladders or Parcheesi and Jacks, yeah. You could hit the hoop. You could hit the hoop with the stick, I think. Those are the only games available at the time.
Side note, Chutes and Ladders is the worst
It is the worst game.
So I loved that game as a kid, and I was like, I cannot wait to play Chutes and Ladders with my kid. And then I bought it, and I was like, oh my gosh.
It's
painful.
It is the worst game.
Painful.
It is the worst.
So
because you never know when it's going to end. It might never end.
Right.
It's not even fun while it's happening.
Nope. There's no fun. So listeners, if you can think of a worse game than Chutes and Ladders, send us an email. ABAinsidetrack.
And if you do, you're lying, because Chutes and Ladders is the worst.
It's the worst game, unequivocally. Equivocally. Don't know the word. Bye.
Okay.
Now, the teacher who was also the primary researcher, he did some things that I think are very smart. And I always, when I'm talking about teachers or, when I'm consulting, they say, I want to do token economy. I'm kind of trying to coax them into doing some of these practices, which are, if you're going to give points, make sure that you are providing set numbers of opportunities, because if you randomly choose when things happen, you'll find nobody ever earns points in your token economy because, whoops, I didn't do that assignment for 2 weeks, or whoops, that activity didn't happen for a month. So in this class, you just had assignments in those 4 academic areas. You had them every day, and every day you'd come to school and they'd either be presented or you'd hand in homework. And every day you'd check the answers. And then after you checked the answers, you'd come up to the teacher. But for every student, they'd come up to the teacher would look at your answers and give you your points based on how much of the work you'd completed. If you hadn't finished the work, you got no points. You could take it again. You could do like a makeup work, and about half the time the kids would usually do makeup work. But pretty much you either did it and you got points for what was right, or you didn't do it and you got no points at all. But the students just came up one at a time and were told how many points they got for their assignment. They put it on their little record form, and that was it. But the teacher did all of this. But again, the classroom was set up in such a way to allow for, here are your assignments. Let's do the assignments. Let's check the assignments. Let's earn your points. So some of that kind of behind the scenes or background work was just a part of the classroom routine, which I think made this doable for one teacher, even though they could have almost 30 students in the room. Occasionally, the teacher would cross-check the points, but there was only one student all year long who tried to pull one over on the teacher and was told you didn't earn points, and then they didn't accurately note that or lose points for not completing their work. Every Monday was exchange day. There was a student who got to be the banker for each of the privileges. So every privilege you could earn, there was one specific banker. And they'd, get the list from the students of who was earning in for what privilege, give it to the teacher. And it took about, 20 to 25 minutes for all of this rigmarole to go. And then the students were able to earn their privileges at the end of the week.
That's the privilege I would want. Is
be
to
the banker?
Be the banker.
Just for one activity. You could be the ball banker, though. Who wants to get out the balls? And nobody does. So no one would ever come over to you.
Oh, you're right.
But, check out the guinea pig in the classroom. Oh, that's the job. Now, there was, I guess, in terms of design, it wasn't exactly a reversal design, but basically you went from a baseline to a token 1 economy, which was, again, just sort of a basic economy, a token 2 economy, which really just became a variable point exchange rather than a fixed point exchange. Then they moved to a quiet behavior condition. So rather than a reversal where the tokens were gone, they just changed it. So no longer were points awarded for completing work. You got points for all the things you used to get and points for being quiet during sets of time. But it was pretty much the same weight for the points. It was really just a way to get a reversal without doing a reversal. Because as the author says, teachers really hate it when you say, hey, let's just stop doing what we're doing that you may or may not like. Because if they like it, they're going to say, no, why would I stop doing that? And then you can't get great data if you never do the reversal. So
It just sounded like you were like, tell me I'm a reversal without telling me I'm a reversal.
So looking at the means and baseline, again, it's a big classroom, so you had a pretty wide range of assignments being complete, anywhere from 69 to 94%, because some kids are going to be good, whether you've got a token economy in place or whether you don't have a token economy in place. As token 1, so just the fixed token schedule was put into place, you saw an increase for lots of the students. So the means increased for task completion went up for the class as a whole, which was great. Math was probably the most variable, but again, that mean percent was much higher. And token economy 2, though, where you had those variable token trade-in, and by variable token trade-in, I meant it wasn't always Monday. You never knew when it was going to happen in the week. That's when you really saw completion just shoot up for all of the conditions, even math, which the kids apparently all hated. When the teacher put in place that quiet behavior contingency, so the tokens were gone, and just said, we're not doing it for completing work anymore. You did see a return of the reduced rates. It wasn't quite as bad as baseline, but there was a definite decrease when quiet behavior was reinforced instead of work completion behavior. Though, again, as time went on, some assignments did better than others. So, you'd expect that in a big classroom. And then when they returned to the token 2 condition, you saw that increase, though it wasn't the same for all of the students. The more interesting data really was individually. When you look at the kids individually, the students who tended to do well, you didn't see any change, which you'd expect. It was the students who tended to not hand in assignments where you saw the most significant shift into work completion. You saw a much higher percentage of work being completed. And for some students, that was consistent across conditions. For some students, it dropped with the quiet behavior, never really got back up to where it had been when the token 2 variable schedule was put into place. But overall, it was, seen to be very effective by this teacher. So again, token economies will work. I mean, there's plenty of research to support that. But with only one teacher, with variable point exchange sort of being superior to a fixed, time of point in change. So again, similar to a lot of our variable schedules that we see in a lot of research. And the big take home, this study went through an entire school year. So this wasn't 2 months or a couple weeks. This was a whole year's worth of data. So when you're looking at students who were going from 69% to, 80 or 90% task completion, that was by the end of an entire school year. So that's significant change for some of these students. As the authors wrote down, that's 12,500 individual assignments being measured in this study.
I don't think we pay teachers enough.
Nope.
No. And this teacher did the whole thing by himself. He found free backup reinforcers. Some negatives here again. This isn't what school really looks like these days. So do we get as good results with token economies with a more project-based work than we do? Because most 5th and 6th graders are like getting together in a small group and they've got iPads and they're doing research online and they're putting together a presentation and they're sort of left to their own devices for chunks of time.
Maybe you earn points in an interdependent group contingency.
Yeah, there's room for more research on this, but I'd be curious to see a little bit more advanced token economy research with more modern kind of teaching technologies overall.
Right. Well, I did pull like the oldest one.
Yeah.
So there's probably some more recent ones. I feel like the piece about the variable exchange day is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense because if there's a certain thing that you're gunning for, that you want to trade your tokens in for, or your points in for, you don't know which day you're going to need to have that many points. Because it could be only a couple days until it's time to trade in again. So you really have to try to amass as many points as you can each day so that when it's trade-in time, you're ready to be the ball guy or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the old saying says, Diana, life is like a variable token economy schedule. You never know which day you're going to trade in your points.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes you bite in, you get a coconut one.
Ugh.
Well, that was really low. That actually was worth the least amount of points is coconut candy.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Caramels are the way to go.
Yeah. One thing I also like too is that this can represent generally like how a simple schedule works, right? Because with a variable schedule, you usually get high-ish and consistent responding, which is what you see. Bam, bam.
Yeah. So token economies, they work with kind of straightforward classrooms without a lot of extra teachers, without expensive backup reinforcement.
Like my Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper.
Yeah, you don't need that.
So that's what they mean by the intrinsic reinforcer, right? That their activities built into the day?
I don't love the title of this because when I hear intrinsic, it's like, kids, you know what? You did it. You earned 100 points. You can feel good about yourselves right now. But
how much you learned.
You actually got to go, get a special job. It was still extrinsic reinforcement.
Right.
And I think the way we use that term.
It was added on reinforcement, but I guess were these activities that they would have been able to do during the day? Is that kind of
I don't know.
From?
It didn't say. I mean, they were activities and privileges chosen by the students. So I would guess that somebody eventually has to feed the animals, or somebody gets to be on the school committee anyway. So I guess in that regard, they were probably reinforcers or putative reinforcers that were going to happen whether there was a token economy in place or not. It just would have been, does anyone want to be on the special committee? And everyone would raise their hand, and the teacher would just arbitrarily pick kids, or probably pick the kids that the teacher liked the best.
Right. Yeah.
So who can say? So again,
so it's like intrinsically built into the day.
Yeah.
Maybe.
They don't need big backup reinforcers to be effective, and they can work in real life environments. I'm going to just really quickly go over the Zlomke and Zlomke because this is a little bit more of a modern
Zlomke and Zlomke.
It would have reminded me of, Muppet Christmas Carol when Statler and Waldorf are playing the Marley Brothers and they sing that song. They go, we're Marley and Marley. Yeah. I just kept, every time I was reading, we're Zlomke and Zlomke. Whoa! Which right in.
It's a good Muppet kind of name, too.
Zlomke duo.
We love your name, Zlomkes.
So this is a little bit more modern twist on a token economy, and it also includes a student who is in a home and classroom for kind of a emotionally challenging emotional behavioral, kind of the term they use in school, classroom. And really what this was looking at is there are so many, there's like so many ways to reinforce appropriate behavior. What about token economy plus? It kind of felt like, what about token economy plus? I don't know, self-monitoring. Let's put the two together and see if we get a chocolate and peanut butter moment. Now, token economies we've already talked about. Self-monitoring, we did a whole episode about, really is just a matter of having the individual record their own behavior as it occurs. It's a lot of positive research. It's a very easy intervention. So the idea is, well, what if we put both of them together? Do we see an additive effect on the increase in the percentage of times a student engaged in socially appropriate behavior? So we had one subject. It was a single subject study, literally, with, again, a 13-year-old student who had a lot of behavior disorders, was low average on a lot of achievement and intellectual tests, and was in, again, a self-contained special education classroom and also in a group home for students with similar types of challenges. The study had an ABCB design, really just looking at these intervals through the day to score the presence or absence of problem behavior. There was also data as a group home, which really was just there to demonstrate that there wasn't carryover of the responses using the token economy when the token economy was not in place. Even though the self-monitoring, technically the student could have engaged in self-monitoring without being told to do so.
True.
So in baseline, really just looking at a couple different, problem behaviors, things like, getting out of seat, noncompliance, disruptive behaviors like talking out and singing was specifically listed, as well as, other more challenging behavior like, aggression. And in baseline, there was sort of the typical response of if you're engaging in these minor behaviors, I'm going to say, hey, cut it out. And I'm going to tell you, go behind a screen, get some sort of like a timeout response. If you're hitting someone, this was weird. The student would be sent to the group home for the rest of the day, to which I wrote, I hope that they looked and seen, was this escape maintained aggression?
Right? Yeah.
Because you're really shooting yourself in the foot there.
That may have just been the rules of the school.
I think that's all it was. Yeah. And then the student wouldn't have access to their free time or their gym time at the end of the day. So kind of a basic sort of, hey, stop doing that stuff, and some minor punishment kind of contingencies. When the token economy in place, the student was given these intervals and like a card. And during those intervals, the student could earn points, up to 3 points each interval for no problem behavior, which I always kind of hate the no problem behavior, but I understand why it's often easier to do no problem behavior versus every other positive behavior. And, that was pretty much it. Each interval, they could earn, something for their absence of problem behavior in each of those categories, the minor or the aggressive behaviors. And, everything else was still in effect. You could still earn timeout, not earn timeout, be put in timeout if you were inappropriate for 5 minutes. And at the end of the day, you could earn up to 48 points. And every 2 hours, you were allowed to trade in whatever points you earned for a backup reinforcer, which the student had chosen with the support of the teacher. So again, pretty similar to the last study, nothing too fancy. When they added in self-monitoring, all that happened was the student was just taught to, note, I did engage or I did not engage in any of these target behaviors. They had their own card and they'd record these things on there. And then after 15 minutes, they'd compare with the teacher and they got a bonus point for, if they agreed with the teacher. So they could earn extra points basically for using the self-monitoring and accurately recording whether they did or did not engage in the target problem behaviors. Again, I've seen this very frequently. It's nothing too fancy. It's a pretty basic self-monitoring system, but like we talked about with self-monitoring research, it's a pretty simple intervention overall. And then they did, reversal back to just the token economy alone. So what do we see in results? Well, again, this was a student who was in a very specialized program. So what you'd expect to see in baseline was, a lot of problem behaviors across these intervals. When the token economy was put in place, you saw what you would expect, which is, yes, there was a decrease in the rates of the inappropriate or problem behaviors with the token economy in place. Now, the question is, do you see more of a reduction with the self-monitoring? And yeah, you did. There was a slight increase also when they returned to the economy alone. This went on for about a month. So again, it was decent results, decent stability of performance of the student. And again, like we'd expect, you don't see, without the token economy and the self-monitoring, you didn't see any change at the group home in terms of how often the student engaged in problem behavior. It wasn't exactly an apples to apples comparison though, in terms of how they did, the amount of time and the tasks being done. But
green to red.
Yes, but you didn't see any generalization, like spontaneous generalization to a brand new environment.
Yeah.
Rob hates that game.
Which game? Oh, I hate
Apples to Apples.
Do you not like that game?
I'm going to buy it for you for your birthday.
I'm going to be sad. It's not a good gift. Now, I was a little confused. I think they were looking at intervals. It was a little confusing exactly which types of behavior they were looking at any given time. So it was hard to really get into the weeds with what specifically improved the most or the least across all these behaviors. So that was a little bit of maybe that was my bad reading. I can't say. But again, what we saw was that with self-monitoring, there was some improvement. Again, you look at the graph and there are a couple of problems. You saw a decrease in problem behavior with the token economy. Could they have run that out a little bit more before adding the self-monitoring? Maybe. But again, when you reversed back to token economy, you didn't see the same lower level of problem behavior. So the self-monitoring probably had some sort of an additive effect, which was nice. But again, you also didn't see, well, what if we just done self-monitoring alone, which is again going to be a lot more of an easy intervention compared to running a whole token economy. Would you have seen that decrease? So who can say? Also, could you have done a better token economy instead of like a DRO token economy? What if we done a DRA token economy? So there are lots of variations on how this study could have been run. It was overall effective, and token economy does seem to work nicely with something like self-monitoring. I would guess it would also work nicely with some other, different types of interventions. But, again, another example of how one can use a token economy, even with systems that are a little bit more, I think, but more quote unquote modern. I've said quote unquote like 30 times this episode, but a little bit more modern in terms of self-monitoring being a system that I think more teachers, nowadays would like to use rather than say the stuffy old token economy. So the token economy is not necessarily dead, and it can be added to other treatments or combined with other treatments for potentially more beneficial effects overall.
Right. One thing I would like to see is some social validity here. Like, ask the participants, do you like this? I think that, especially when you're using kids that can talk, ask them, right? And if they like it, great. If they don't, try something else.
Yeah, I agree. I think the fact, like you said at the beginning, Diana, these are old studies, which means the chances that they did social validity the way we've seen in the past 10 years, pretty slim.
Yeah.
At best, they asked somebody else if they thought the study was good.
Right.
Hey, what do you think? Does this kid seem better than they used to be?
Or hey, just random reviewer, how do you think it went? Right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Also, they didn't really get into whether this student was doing better in school or if they just sat there quietly without being disruptive anymore. So I would have liked to see more data on,
point.
hey, did they actually get better at school? Or did they just sit there quietly because they knew if I just buy my time and I just sit here and deal with this garbage, eventually I'll get to do something fun. I don't know. What do people do in 2003? Watch Shrek on DVD, maybe. I don't know. It was a movie back then.
I don't think there's anything else people did in that year.
It's all anyone did. After 9/11, we just needed Shrek DVDs. It was the only thing that kept us going as a nation. All right, so that's token economies, the basic token economy that you might see in a classroom. I want to talk about token economies in a new setting, but I don't want to do it right now. First, I want to take a little break. Then I want to come back and talk about new frontiers of token economies. New-ish. New old frontiers. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back talking all about token economies, or the basics of token economies and the basic application of token economies. But before we continue with some old new frontiers of token economies, I want to remind listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. So by listening to this episode, you are able to earn 1 learning credit. Wow, isn't that exciting? I hope you think so. If you do and agree, you just need to finish listening to the episode and then go to the website, abainsidetrack.com, get CEUs, or you can just go to abainsidetrack.com/getget-CEUS if you want to type it directly in. You're going to need to know 2 secret code words in the episode, though, so make sure you're listening for those. I'll give you the first one right now. The first one is falafel, F-A-L-A-F-E-L. It is a ball made of it's chickpea meal, right?
Yep.
You can put spices, all sorts of great things.
So good.
Yeah.
I love falafel.
Me too. Falafel.
That was definitely a food that I think I first had when I was in college. Everyone was like, come on, we're going to go to the falafel place. And I was like, I don't know, guys. It's not McDonald's. I don't know if it's appropriate for me as an American to eat. But I did, and I loved it.
So delicious.
So good. So
Way
good.
better than McDonald's, by the way.
It is. I mean, I'll always have a soft spot for McDonald's,
Gross.
but objectively, it is probably better to eat a falafel flavor-wise than just getting some sort of like average cheeseburger at McDonald's. Falafel. Not cheeseburger, falafel. All right, everybody. So we talked about kind of how most people think of token economies as, you use them in classrooms and the kids can earn points and they get pencils and jazz. Of course, those weren't the two articles we discussed specifically. That was more Diana's anecdote about token economies.
Can I tell you the other anecdote about fourth grade? It's not related to token economies. It's just the other thing I need everyone to know.
Mm-hmm.
That the only thing I remember about fourth grade and my fourth grade teacher was this point system that we had, and the fact that she told us when she was a child, a tornado came through her yard and picked up a chicken, took all the feathers off the chicken, and put the chicken back down.
Do you think that really happened?
She told it to us from her own memory. Chicken was fine, just bald.
That sounds like she had some sort of terrible trauma, and that chicken story was sort of what the psychiatrist at the time made up to like help her with, deal with her terrible memory.
Okay, that's it.
So she didn't go insane.
Just wanted you to know that.
Great. What I really want to know is, have token economies ever been used outside of like classrooms and schools?
Sure.
He says, having actually read the articles you're going to talk about.
Leading
But
question. Yeah, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the use of tokens in the prison system way back in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
I wasn't even born yet.
None of us were.
Don't show your age, everyone.
All right, so the authors of this article, this is like a fascinating article, and I'm so glad that I'm getting to talk about it because it's not like my favorite article in the sense of favorite articles, but it gives you a lot to think on in 4 short pages.
Mm-hmm.
You got the 4-pager?
Yeah, man.
Oh,
I assigned it to myself.
just kidding.
It presents something from a totally different perspective and does so in a way that's not like beholden to behavior analysis, right? So the whole point of this article is a cautionary tale of the ways in which these things can quickly spiral out of control. And the 2 authors were intimately tied to this prison system because one of them was the director of it, and then the other one was the guy who came in to consult with it. So they set up this system, they were super proud of it, and then everything went to crap.
Mm-hmm.
They fixed it, and they said, we need to write this up so that other people don't do the same thing that happened here, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So they started us off talking about how no one has really done a lot of work in the prison system to date in 1977, but maybe there should be what they call behavior modification systems introduced in this setting, and they were going to be the people who did it. So it's a quasi-experiment is how they label it, because it was something that kind of naturally occurred, and because it was within this closed system, they already were taking data.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So they were able to go back and analyze carefully what occurred and then use that data to write it up. So it wasn't a planned thing that happened here. The participants related here were inmates of the Shelby County, which is in Tennessee, prison, but it's called a penal farm. Don't hear that term a lot.
No.
And I don't think that anyone got consent, right?
Does not sound like
Doesn't
it.
really sound like
farm.
it,
Mhm.
no. So that's important to note too. The program that we're going to talk about, the inmates could elect in to participation
Mhm.
in the program. So it's possible that when they elected in, they said, oh, we want to see how this works. Can we
Yeah.
get permission? But they don't talk about that
There
in
was
the
an
article.
informed consent about this is what the system is going to be. This is what you earn. This is what you have to gain. Maybe.
I don't know, but they didn't say it one way or the other at all. So we don't actually know. And the number of people who were enrolled in this program varied throughout the course of the study. There were between 7 and 19 at any given time, and 39 different people were enrolled in it at some point during the study, but they didn't have control over who was in or out, you know?
Mhm. Well, in terms of indirect social validity, I mean, we'll get to it, but
Yes,
it did seem there were times that people seemed more interested in joining the programs and times when people were less interested in being a part of the program.
So they called it the self-management program, and it was intended to be this like additional like positive behavior thing that our first author, Dr. Bassett, designed and put into place. And he seemed very passionate about it. There's not a link, but there's a reference to like the whole manual that he wrote about this program. So it was all designed with really good intentions. And there were 11 staff who worked at the prison who also participated. 9 of them were called behavioral technician counselors, and they all had received, and the other 2, I believe, were our 2 authors. They never really say. They all had received training specifically in this program, 25 hours of training, which is not nothing, and they all had bachelor's degrees as well. Only one of them, I think, was psychology-related bachelor's degree. Oh, no, I'm sorry. One of the other staff was a master's level psychologist. Maybe that is our author. It was unclear. Yeah, I think it is, because he oversaw the training, and then they had discussion groups about what they were doing, right? So it was like a little like hippie-ish, right? Like, oh, we're going to introduce.
It was oversight, though. It was oversight.
Absolutely, yeah. And they were really trying to make a better system at the Shelby County Penal Farm. So in phase 1, the first author, Dr. Bassett, was present full-time as the director. So he was always there. He was implementing the self-management program. And the second author came periodically as the program consultant, Dr. Blanchard. That was like the setup. That was before they realized anything was going to go wrong and they were taking data. Phase 2 happened because our first author, Dr. Bassett, took a leave of absence. We don't know why. They don't tell us.
Man, I thought you said he was going to die. So I'm glad you said leave of absence.
It's an article from Beyond the Grave.
I don't know what he was doing.
You know, when life gives you lemons, you make a research idea out of it.
Yeah. So he still consulted in. He said he consulted in 1 to 2 days a week. And so did the other guy. So they were just consulting in, but the rest of the time, the 9 guys who are the behavior techs were like, they're in charge. And then phase 3 was the same as phase 1 because Dr. Bassett came back and said, oh no, what has happened here?
What have you done to my fabulous program?
And then had to spend, I think they said 3 months trying to get things back on track, basically.
That's the worst.
It was rough. It was really disheartening to see this program just start with these positive intentions and, positive results. I mean, we can talk about the appropriateness of including prisoners in, any program like this. But, let's say, just looking at the graph, look at these positive results and then just seeing how badly everything went. And in ways that weren't just like, and the results just weren't as good. Like they went Lord of the Flies kind of bad without the main folks in place.
So the whole original idea in phase 1 was it was supposed to just be this contingent award system of points for doing good things. They don't actually tell us what the good things are. It's not really specified.
There was reference to like either a previous article or previous research. I couldn't
that
track
was his
anything
manual.
else. Yeah.
Go look at his manual, but
there wasn't anything readily available.
Doing good things, I guess you got points for it. And that was while he was there. And then during phase 2, when the director was absent, over time, the behavior technicians ended up consciously or unconsciously changing the program to add in this response cost piece so that if they did something wrong or misbehavior, then they got points removed.
I hate that.
It was like angry parent kind of removal too. So like, I'm mad now, so 1,000,000 points.
Exactly.
And you lose them.
I guess they kept pretty good records because they could see that the cost of the fines kept increasing over time. So they said, like 1 week, things would, like a demerit would be 10 to 25 points. And then the next week, for doing the exact same thing, it was 250 to 1,000 points.
Wow.
I can't believe there was no reactivity. Like, were individuals looking at this data like on an ongoing basis? Like, what? Oh, yikes, 1,000 points.
At the data.
Probably not.
Yeah,
I need to tone it
probably
down.
They probably came in, they're like, how's everything going? Great. You still doing it? Yes. Okay, bye.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess if you're in prison, the poor participants are inmates. So how bad are things going to get with this program in place, right? Because they have limited options.
They have no control over their environment.
They really don't. Yeah,
they have zero control, right?
And they said there was also variability between the therapists on who implemented the response cost and for what behaviors. So the inmates really had no idea what to expect from anyone or, what behavior was going to produce this response cost, which is absolutely terrible conditions to try to live under. It's extremely stressful.
Mm.
And they said when they looked that 7 out of the 9 behavior techs gave out 96% of the response cost. So there were 2 guys who didn't do this, right? But all of the rest of them,
These guys
was a snowball effect.
Those two guys are like, something's going wrong.
I know. They should have alerted.
Well, also those 2 might have been under, their own. I mean, their own pressures of everyone else being like, why aren't you doing this? You're not doing the system the right way. You're not taking away the points. You're not doing it right. So, I mean, they might have also been, under some sort of aversive situations if they were the only two who still ran the program. Well, we don't even know if they ran the program correctly, but they weren't running it.
know.
They weren't running it as badly as
they
the
were
others.
checked out.
Maybe they just didn't do anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So then in phase 3 was when the director came back and looked at this and said, "My God, what have you done?
I'm going back on leave. Goodbye."
You've made a monster of my beautiful hippie system that I had put into place to make this world a better place." And
77, that he and the inmates were getting together. They were smoking. They were just, turn the chair backwards, put his cap on backwards. They're having a great
a
rap session. Yeah.
Yes, we don't know what the points were supposed to be traded in for either. They didn't give us any of those details. Yeah, so it was just, this really bad power trip, basically, that the BTs went on during the course of the absence of the director. And in order to get a hold of the data and try to figure out what was going on, the authors said, okay, we're going to use these 2 dependent variables to try to measure the aversiveness of the program. And those 2 variables were the, kind of works out to the percentage of inmates that quit the program, because remember, it was voluntary to be in this like extra self-management thing. And then the number of disciplinary reports that were given divided by the number of days. So for the first one, the inmates quitting the program in phase 1, it worked out to be like 3% of them over the course of the time period. In phase 2, however, it was 21% of them that left the program. And then in phase 3, when they got things back under control, it was down to 1%. So you can really see the comparison there. And then the second dependent variable, these disciplinary reports, the math is a little bit confusing because they had to multiply this by 1,000 in order to get a percent. Yeah. But anyway, phase 1, the number they got was 0.66.
1,000?
No, it's like it was a low number, so they multiplied by 1,000 to not have it be like 0.00066.
Oh, I understand now. Okay.
Phase 2, however, it was 5.13. So you can see the variation there. And then in phase 3, it was back to 0.46. So that would indicate to you, of course, they don't want to be involved in this because they're getting all of these demerits all of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do have the question of when the directors were coming to consult, what were they doing?
I told you. They're going, how is it going? Great. Okay. All right. Bye.
Yeah.
I guess. But then the fact that they didn't take that responsibility in writing this paper, they were just like, oh, everything was like super bad.
Yeah, and we don't, there's a lot of context that's missing here. We're not hearing anything from the prisoners, so we don't know. Was it as bad as the data look? Was it even ever that good? Did they feel they had no choice but being in the program? I mean, clearly some of them realized they had a choice because they were able to drop out. Well, how much say did they have in the program? What were some of the targets they were looking at? There are a lot of pieces. And then again, the context of, the researcher, he's consulting. Maybe it was like he's barely coming in or an hour and all he could look at were like the most intensive problem behaviors. So things like people losing all their points for minor infractions just didn't, unfortunately rise to what he had time for. Who knows? A lot of things not in this paper. If
I were reviewing this paper today, I would have a lot of questions.
You can have more than 4 pages, Doctor. Why don't you really get into the detail?
Needs more detail.
Yeah.
Not technological.
But back then, the editors would just turn their chair backwards, turn their hat backwards and just edit. That's how everyone, this article is groovy, baby, and then they'd pass it.
All right.
I'm just kidding, 1970s Java editors.
I'm going to end with a quote.
Okay.
Finally, it may be noted that the deterioration of an intentionally reinforcing environment to a punitive, controlling system is consistent with Skinner's 1971 descriptive analysis of the naturally occurring contingencies operating within society in general. The long road toward determining the elusive active ingredients of effective rehabilitation can only be lengthened by repeating the errors of society within the prison walls.
Well, I'm glad we solved that problem since 1977, and our prison's just a fabulous place where the recidivism rates are 0 and everyone goes on to live fabulous lives. That's not what happened? I don't, what do I know?
Right. This is such a good study in the larger view of saying just because something works doesn't mean that we should be applying it. And this is like right up Sidman's alley, right? Thinking about the coercion
and its fallout
involved here.
I understand what you mean, Diana, but to me it was a slightly different point I took from this in terms of you're making a face. I think my point was more how it was more like good intentions of having systems that could work in a lab or could work in real life don't mean that they're always going to lead to the results you want. Like there's more to there's a difference between understanding and using a technology of behavior and just using a manualized technology of behavior, because one of those is probably going to result in long-standing change that is sensitive to the needs of the participants, and the other one is going to work as long as it is easy and then sort of fall apart as reinforcers for the people in charge of the system or who have the power shift. Which again, it's always easier to yell at someone and say, stop doing that, than it is to actually teach them what they're supposed to do. So, most people, given their druthers, they'd never actively choose that, but in real life, you yell at your kids rather than like, oh, let's take a moment and like learn about what you're supposed to do. It's like, how did you mess that up? You messed that up, and now I'm yelling. That's the easy option.
I don't yell.
Well,
just kidding.
Well, we don't. We have a podcast about behavior analysis. Of course, we never do that. But in a prison system, you're probably going to get more people who are interested in, hey, stop doing that, rather than what are the behaviors that led to this location? What are the other contextual variables that we may or may not, right here in this moment, be able to change? Are we giving people any sense of control of their lives when they're in prison? And,
No.
at least in America, no, of course we don't. That's not what prison's for. Prison's meant to be a punisher, and it's not an effective punisher, and it's not
Not at
effective.
all.
Mhm.
And I don't want to get too far into it because we still have one more article about mining we want to talk about.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that you chose this one, Dan. I think it does point to how token economies can be used in a new setting, but also the dangers of using a technology, even if it does have positive research to support it.
Exactly.
25 hours sounds like enough time to learn how to use a token economy forever and ever, but apparently it is not.
You got to read the manual.
Got to read the every night and have someone actually watching you do the manual.
Okay. I'm talking about mine now.
Your mine?
Mine.
Mine?
Now.
In a mine.
So mine looks at using a token economy with miners in an open pit mining.
We picked this
facility.
article because someone emailed and said, I love ABA Inside Track, but you guys never talk about open pit mining. Well, here you go. We did it.
I didn't even know what open pits were, and so I had to look it up on the
You were so
internet.
excited.
I was.
You were
And
so
so it's just
excited.
a large hole that you dig stuff out of.
Yeah.
And so I did a little more, like I told you.
I think I made
spoiler
that
alert.
the podcast art for
Oh,
this
good.
episode, so you might be able to look at your podcast player and see an open pit mine.
So you can go to the Department of Labor. It's www.msha.gov/data reports/fatality reports/search and see every single fatality or accident that occurred within mining within the last however. You can see the preliminary report. You can see the fatality report. You can see a picture of where the accident occurred. And you can also see best practices to avoid it.
Wow.
I know.
Transparency is key.
Very transparent. Right? And so I just thought that was interesting because I was like, how many people die now? Because there was a lot of people that got hurt. This is one of the reasons why they did this.
You hear about mine emergencies around the world every couple of years. There's, like a terrible, like a
We've had
catastrophic cave-in,
Mhm.
people trapped, people dying.
We've
So-
had 6 mining fatalities since January 2021. And
Mm.
usually it has to do with maintenance and use of heavy equipment.
Makes
So
sense.
like equipment falling off on you,
Yeah.
crushing you, pulling rocks out,
Yeah.
and taking your body with you, right?
Mhm.
So they tell you it all in graphic detail, so I
Oh.
won't tell you, but if you want to check that out, go there. But when these authors were looking at it, they looked at the research before and said, okay, what's going on? And in previous research, they looked at changing behaviors that were deemed unsafe or changing the environment behavior interaction of the conditions, but never looked at the severity of injuries on whether it was effective long term. So they said, then they were looking at like out of work injuries, which wasn't helpful for their specific. So they wanted to investigate the effectiveness of a token economy with miners. Miners were given token or stamps, trade-in stamps, they called them, for not engaging in accidents or injuries for a specific amount of time. It like coincided with a pay period.
Okay.
Extended the research because effects were maintained for several years.
Mhm.
12 or more years.
I was amazed that the authors got this article done because, I mean, you usually think about like, well, we're working on this research for like 6 months or maybe a year, and then we published it. I mean, this was over a decade. Like, and finally, we can publish an article about it.
Well, it is important to know that the first author was the director of health and safety at one of these mining facilities, right?
Just doing his job.
He's just doing his job. He's just taking data. And they said it's really important that we do this there was lost time due to injury was 8% at one of the mines, higher than the national average, or 8 times. And
8 times.
8
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And then the other was 3 times higher than the national average. And in the previous 5 years, 2 people were killed due to accidents in one mine, and 1 suffered a permanent disability in the other mine. So like they were like, okay, something's got to change.
These are
Yeah.
the unsafest mines.
Right. And so there were 2 open pit mines that used large machinery and mined for uranium. And they give you like a whole spiel about how it happens and what exactly machines they use. We don't really need to go into that.
That's the first time I understood what the yellow cake was.
Yeah.
I remember that was like there was like some yellow cake uranium scandal like a long time ago. And I was like, what is that? Can you eat that? Or what is, I finally understand it. Thanks, research.
Yeah. So injuries occurred across all settings at the mine, but mostly when they used and maintenance the heavy equipment, right? But everyone was included in this token economy. Employees of 2 mines, including clerical staff, personnel, miners, the people doing all the serious business, and the people that were not doing all the serious business, everyone was included. I think that's important. One mine had between 197 and 606 participants throughout the 12 years. They gave you like a rationale for why it changed. And one mine had 450 to 500 across 14 years. So it's like a long time, right? Long time, a lot of people. And it does not appear that they gained informed consent at all. But I think their rationale was that everyone was doing it and it was necessary because people were dying.
Right.
So they're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. So
what are the rules there on, if you're a business, you don't need informed consent to say, everyone, here's some new policy we've put into place. You would need the informed consent just to say, hey, are you cool if I use all the data from the past 12 years, right?
But they use group design. So, I mean,
and it was already happening. So, yeah,
80s,
would they really, yeah.
In the 80s, it probably, now you'd probably have to get like general.
You might
like a questionnaire, like, could I use this?
Yeah.
Do you want me to use your data? And all,
Yeah. So the dependent variables were number of days lost per million person hours due to an injury. So that's like the frequency of injuries. And they used like the million person hours because that's what you would have. It was very confusing, but whatever, that's what it is. Then they had the number of lost time, injuries per million person hours. So that coincides with the severity of the injury, right? So the more severe an injury, the longer you're going to be out. And then the cost in adjusted dollars. So this was including paying for compensation insurance, medical care for injured workers, repairing damaged equipment, and the token economy itself. Right? Okay, cool. So they also, this is directly from page 219. I'm going to read it.
Okay.
Because I tried to paraphrase it and I could not do it justice.
Okay.
So a benefit to cost ratio was calculated to provide an index of the extent to which the dollar saved as a result of the token economy exceeded the cost of operating the token economy. The cost of accidents and injuries each year following the introduction of the token economy was subtracted from the mean cost during baseline. This number was then divided by the cost of the trading stamps for that year. These data were also adjusted for inflation and hours worked as described above, like I told you, for the cost data.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically they accounted for everything to make sure that it was worth it.
Right.
Yeah. But when I tried to put that in,
it's hard to
I do not know.
cut down when you're talking about formulas and
The authors say that they didn't use traditional IOA, but all of the data was sent to multiple agencies, right? Like workers' compensation.
The state has to look at it, right? Yeah.
The Miner Safety and Health Administration, the Wisconsin Workers' Compensation. So basically, everyone saw all the data.
I think it's so funny because I got to that point and there's so much oversight. And I'm like, well, how is your mine still like 8 times higher than the national average of mine time compensation. Like, did anyone said anything? Or they're like, no, this mine seems like a crummy mine. Shrug.
Maybe.
But at least the paperwork's all in.
Yeah, they're like, ooh, somebody's got to do something. So this is what they did, right? So the design was a multiple baseline across sites. And, God bless, if you believe in God, these authors where they were like, we didn't originally want to do a multiple baseline design, but I started this in 1972. And then a nearby mine heard about its effectiveness and then wanted to try it in 75. I just love it that they added that in there.
I think it's one of the most organic research studies I've ever read.
I also love that it's like from the same time period as these other two articles from the 70s when they started it, but they didn't publish it until 87. Right? They took data for that long.
They took data forever. And they took data actually until the first mine closed. That is when they were like, oh, I have all this data. No one works there anymore because
my job's just been cut in half. I guess I have some time to write this up now.
Right. So again, the first author claimed that he worked as the health and safety person at the SB, it's like South Basin or thing. And he did it due to safety concerns. Yep, people were dying. Right, so the independent variable was this token economy where they had these trading stamps. And so during baseline, nothing, right? It was just like what was happening before. But they did make a point that they're like, we're not doing a super bad job, right? We're regulated by the Mining Safety and Health Administration. We develop policies specifically around safety. We have orientation. We have refreshers. We have frequent inspections. Our initial training included classroom and on-the-job training in all things, right? They said all the things that they had the trainings on, but I did not. You don't need to know them, right?
Well, but I think it's the same in like all the research we've ever looked at. Like you can do lots of like ahead of time training, but the issue becomes, how was the training? Was it as thorough when it started, and what's the follow up over time? And if you're just looking at like, wow, things are bad, and at least we recognized how bad they are, that's not the same as making sure people are doing what they need to be doing.
Right. And so they included a yearly refresher. They had a toolbox safety meeting. I love that they called that toolbox safety meeting with the foreman twice a month, right? Where they talked about potential accidents. Employees could bring up any potential hazards, right? All the areas of the mine were inspected weekly for safety. So they had like things in place. So when you're reading this, you're not like, oh, this is a bad place to work. It doesn't sound like it's the worst place to work. It seems like they care. But that's baseline. And when you look at the data for baseline, it's not great, especially at that second site. When you're looking at the frequency, basically the number of days lost, it's fairly variable, but quite high, right? Around like 8,000 per million person hours, right? It's kind of low for the first
I have
site.
no idea.
I don't know, but it's probably bad if you have anyone out, right? And then, baseline for cost and adjusted dollars was high for both sites. And then when you're looking at number of lost time, super high, like at the top. The top high.
Yeah.
So you're like, ooh, okay. So then they implement this token economy and they divided everyone that worked at the sites into 4 groups. And the groups coincided to how hazardous their job was. So group 1 was the least hazardous. That's like the secretary.
Right.
The
desk job.
Right, the desk job. And then the group 4 was the most hazardous. So they're like in the pit using the heavy machines. Right? So individual workers were given a specific number of trading stamps each month with their paychecks. And if they had not suffered a lost time injury that they were required to go see a physician for, or a compensation injury that resulted in a physician's care, right? So then they tell you the stamps would, for one of the mines was 300, 400, 500, and 700 stamps, which seems like a lot of stamps. But I'll tell you why. Because they could trade in those stamps for a ton of cool stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we'll get there. And then the other mine, it was 400, 500, 600, and 700. And in addition to getting individual trading stamps, if all workers under a specific supervisor did not get injured, they got additional stamps. 2, 3, 5, 7, 3, 4, 7, 8, right? For each of them. And then you could also be part of the safety and health committee and get additional stamps if you had a good suggestion, ranging from 500 to 2,500
Wow.
if it prevented death, right? Or serious injury.
Everyone really thinks that being on these committees is like a fun thing.
I know. I'm like, oh gosh, everyone. I try to
it's
avoid
nice to feel
committees.
heard, right? Especially if you're in a job where, historically you probably don't have a lot of authority and you're just being told to do dangerous things all day for, probably not as much pay as you deserve. You're being told like, hey, you had an idea that was a straightforward idea and it saved lives. Here's a little extra something. Everyone likes that.
Sure.
feeling.
Yeah, it's totally good practice.
They didn't take tokens away ever. You have your trading stamps, you get to keep them. But if an injury did occur, depending on how many days you were out, you lost the opportunity to gain more trading stamps.
Right.
So 1 to 2 days of injury, you lost the opportunity for a month, 3 to 4 days, 2 months, 5 to 6 days, 3 months, with a max of 6 months if more than 10 days.
Yep.
So they were serious. But you still got paid, right? But it's like trading
you didn't get the extra stuff.
Sure.
Yeah,
extra
I just want to
stamps.
be clear with that, right? And then for like the group award, it was lost for 1 month if someone got injured, but the whole group couldn't get extra stamps unless that person came back. So they didn't nobody died during this.
Good.
So far, they said there was no deaths.
Mm-hmm.
So that's lucky because they would never get again, right? If
Right.
someone
I
never
did
came
wonder
back.
what would happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
They
okay.
did specify in the discussion that nobody died during this. So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so 6 weeks before they implemented the token economy for the trading stamps, employees were given the program and the schedule. 1 month before, employees were giving 10,000 stamps to start off if they hadn't had an injury in 2 years for one mine and 1 year for the other mine. So they started them off with some stamps. And so could you trade the stamps? Since they had these redemption centers, which sounds fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, for example, in 1972, 7,600 stamps could be used for a comforter for a full-size bed, and 20,000 stamps could be used for a cast aluminum gas-fired barbecue grill.
Hey.
So it's actual things people could use.
So stamps are kind of like yen, right? Like each one isn't worth a lot, but you're going to get a lot of them. Okay.
Yeah. So they said casual conversation suggested that workers and families saved up their stamps and got microwaves, cuckoo clocks, shotguns, bowling balls, and many kinds of small electronic appliances.
So I could get like a home Pong machine that just played Pong all day?
No, Rob, we're saving up for that cuckoo clock.
No.
Don't go spending it on the ping
But
pong
I want
machine.
my own Pong machine.
Clock.
It's going to look so good.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so
Not gonna
To our new comforter.
Not gonna look dated at all. Put it over the
love that.
microwave.
Yeah. And so, spoiler alert, the data look great, right? Across all the frequency, severity, and cost adjustments. Frequency went down to almost 0. Severity went down to almost 0. Although it was a little more variable, right? Because like one instance can like take you out, literally. And the cost to benefit ratio looked amazing, right? It was like significant decrease. And so the authors end the paper by saying everyone involved benefited. Like managers benefited because people weren't getting injured. People benefited because they weren't getting injured and they got stuff. No deaths or permanent injuries occurred after implementation of the token economy. The token economy stayed with the first mine until they closed, and with the second mine until the publication of this manual. And they said, till this day, I want to be like, I'm calling them.
Might still be in place right now.
Yeah, so they said the number of days lost at work was 1/4 the national average for the first mine, and 1/12 the national average
Yeah.
for the second mine.
They were 8 times and 3 times higher, I think it was.
Yep, 8 times and 3 times, and it
Right.
went down to 1/4 and 1/12.
Wow.
Yeah.
So like the percent change is huge.
Huge, right? And so
And did they save money?
yes, they saved money. That was that cost benefit ratio, figure 3. They saved money. People were happy. And then they said, we didn't collect social validity. All the workers had to include it. But casually, the workers liked the tokens after initial skepticism. And they actually asked to be included in their operating contract for the second year that they would keep in the trading system. So
Do they have like a catalog?
they did.
Yeah.
Yep.
'Cause
You could go through the catalog.
I love that.
Yeah.
I
I would just love the catalog.
I like the social validity of, one, I think they forgot to give one of the miners a stamp, and his wife called and was like, what happened? Where are the stamps? Like, he's supposed to have this many stamps. And they said,
Right.
you're not going to call and won't complain. You're going to call and report something missing if you don't care about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, although they didn't collect actual
No.
Formal
it's
social validity,
anecdotal.
anecdotally, it
social
seemed like
validity.
people liked it, right? And I would like it too for just doing my job.
I mean,
and not dying.
If you, I think it was a union. I think miners are a union job. So
Yep.
if you're saying we want a collectively bargained contract that includes this token economy in it, I actually don't know if you can get much
Yeah.
higher social
Yeah,
validity
So-
in this country than
I'm
that.
glad that the mine director didn't take a leave of absence for 3 months. Right?
No, it
And
sounds
the whole
like it sounds like he
system
was there the whole
devolved into
time.
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah. No, I mean, he just basically, his job dissolved,
Yes.
but
Well,
that's different.
yeah.
Because uranium's not as profitable, I guess it once was.
The way they were processing.
The
it
way they
was
were
not-
processing
was
it.
not-
Sure. It's all about plutonium now.
Sure,
Time
I know.
travel.
I have no
Yeah.
idea. But yeah, so I really like this. I like this study because it hits all the things that I don't like about token economies,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And it seems, the authors didn't mean it to be a research study. It just happened to be one.
Yeah.
And it worked.
And it was an incredibly socially significant problem
right? Death.
that they found a way to address.
Yeah.
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 In a way that was helpful and meaningful for the people that are addressing it.
Mhm.
I mean, could they do more for social validity? Yes. Right?
Sure, but they didn't start it as like, man, I can't wait 12
Right.
years from now. This is going to be a killer study, you
Right.
guys.
This is the accumulation of my life's work.
It sort of was just a happy accident. They're like, we got all this data. This is relevant.
Yeah,
I
they're
think
like,
relevant
oh.
information.
Single subject design is a thing? All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I love this. I love this article. I'm going to put it in my toolbox.
I wonder if there was a version of this article that went out in like a trade magazine,
Like the
or
Miner
trade
magazine?
journal for like
Miners today.
whatever. Yeah, some
We
sort
can
of.
look it out.
I'm curious.
But anyway, that's
Wow.
all I want to say about mine because I think they were really thoughtful about writing it. It read amazing. So if anyone's looking for some like unrestricted time and your supervisor says it's okay that you can read this article about token economies, there's the caveat. I think you should because it reads reads like a convo.
Yeah.
Like I feel like David Fox is sitting across me like, well, So
Let me tell you a story.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's real, and it's real life. Which again, a lot of articles don't capture that. There, we set this up. We knew this was a research study. I mean, a lot do, but some don't. You're sort of able to pick apart like, well, here's all areas I see failure of social validity or failure of generalization. But when you're talking about 12 years and modern times, we could say, hey, here's some better ways to make this research study. But it wasn't meant to be a research study. It was meant to be a safety protocol.
Cool.
Well, let's move into dissemination station to wrap up our discussion about token economies. So like we said at the top, this is not meant to be an exhaustive review of all token economies. It was sort of just a basic, this is kind of how token economies can be used. I mean, we could have even gone back to some of the work in, say, mental hospitals back in like the 50s and 60s where token economies were being used. But I like that we hit a nice breadth of research. We talked about classrooms, which again, a lot of us are going to be familiar with the classroom token economies. And then we went outside of kind of the more typical research areas and looked at other populations, some underserved populations. The results weren't always positive. Sometimes we learned more about what could go wrong with the token economy than what could go right. But I left these, really still feeling pretty positive about the technology of token economies with some caveats as to the need to control the economy and to supervise the economy and to make sure that you can do these things. And if you're saying, I don't think I can do these things, or I don't feel like I could run this without XYZ supports, maybe a token
Don't do
economy
it.
is not for you. And more importantly, for the people who are counting on you to support them in whatever environment those people happen to be in.
Right. I think my take home is you should get social validity, right? You
Mhm.
should be asking your participants if they prefer or want to use this, whatever type of programming you are using. And you can do it by concurrent schedule, right? You can do a whole lot of things. But if you're using a token economy and not assessing whether the tokens are reinforcers, in fact, and you've never assessed preference of that versus something else, right? Then I don't think you've done your job. Sorry.
So not exactly social validity of token economies as a whole, but social validity in terms of the nitty gritty of what's being used in
Yes.
the token economy.
Yep.
Donna, any token economy thoughts? Anything you weren't expecting that you...
Just in the same way that you shouldn't slap a DRO on it,
Mm-hmm. Gotta make sure.
I also think that you shouldn't slap tokens on a problem and
Mhm.
expect them to fix the problem. We talked a lot about the pitfalls here
Mhm.
of token economies, but they're not, what's that word? Panacea?
Pants.
Yes.
Did I
Yeah.
use that right? Yeah,
I
you
don't
can't
know.
just slap a token on something and expect it to work. There's
Even if it's got like
needs to be really thoughtful
Peppa Pig.
approach
Peppa Pig.
and
My favorite YouTuber is on the token, even if that's the case.
Who's your favorite YouTuber?
I don't have-
Booty shoe.
Oh.
What am I?
Me?
12? I don't know if you...
But wait, would you argue that the worst type of token economy is a DRO token economy?
I would argue.
They had one. They had
I
one.
know.
We did. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. So, it needs to be thoughtful. There needs to be
Slomkey
a
and
reason.
Slomkey. DRO token
Okay, we're not
economy.
their study was fine.
Yeah,
and
their
it
study
served
was
the purpose
great.
that it needed to.
It did.
As far as we can tell. But you need to be thoughtful and have a reason for doing a token economy, and also be ready to determine if it's going to work and put in the time needed to oversee the project, as well as determine if it's preferred for the person.
But it's not necessarily a lot of time. Don't take home like, oh, it sounds like a lot of extra work. I don't think I can do it. Because again, the first article we discussed was a teacher who was able to run it with minimal additional supports, or no additional supports actually. So it's not impossible. But yes, you have to put that planning into place. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to be talking about problems that weren't, there were problems in these studies that I think more modern researchers are more salient, more aware of, in terms of, where's our social validity? How are we including our participants? Are they in a position to say, no, I don't want to be a part of your token economy?
And spoiler alert, stay tuned for a later episode when we get into the real nitty gritty of the principles behind token economies.
Right. It's going to blow your socks off.
Yeah. It blew mine off. I have no socks on right now.
Right?
Well,
Yeah.
I can't wait.
This was just a little glaze over.
The frosting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, until the next time we talk about token economies, I think that brings this episode to an end. Thank you all so much for listening to ABA Inside Track. We are very happy to provide you this podcast for free every week. If you would like to give us some feedback, there are a lot of ways you can do that. You can leave reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you like the show, why not subscribe so you get a new episode every single week? You can also find us on all the social media as ABA Inside Track. You can find these posted on YouTube with the YouTube subtitling feature enabled. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all the articles that we discussed, as well as to purchase CEs for this and all of our previous episodes. And if you're interested in a little bit more ABA Inside Track, you can go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track to subscribe to get episodes ahead of time, as well as to get access to some locked features. We have our book clubs and everything. So a lot of interesting things you can check out there. And of course, you can always feel free to email us at any time at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. And if you are interested in purchasing one of those aforementioned CEs on our website, you want the second secret code word. It is MUTE, M-U-T-E. It's like the button that you have on your microphone when you're going to cough or burp really loudly.
Or on my new mug.
Or it's on,
Diana bought me.
yes, Jackie got a new mug. You want to describe the mug, Jackie?
It's a white mug with a little word bubble. And in the word bubble, it says, "You're on mute." I'm so happy about it.
It's for Zoom calls.
Yes.
Will we remember this? Is Zoom, we're going to remember Zoom, 5 years from now, and everyone being on mute and all those Zoom
On
meetings?
the bottom, I'm going to put COVID 2020 to 20.
Do you want me to sign it for you?
present. Yeah.
Okay, well.
2020 to present.
Yeah.
Or whenever it ends, right?
I mean, it's going to be around for to some extent forever, but hopefully it won't be pandemic levels. Anyway, mute is the code word. Before we wrap up, big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, to Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, to Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his editing, and to Hollis Irvin from Sycamore Workshop for his visual design. We'll be back next week with another full-length episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye!
Bye-bye.